at 6 o'clock or a little after 6. I'm sure we may have people joining us later, but I think we have people out there, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We are so excited that you are joining us tonight. This is a second in a 3-part series that the Community Library is hosting in partnership with the Lee Pesky Learning Center. I'm going to introduce myself very quickly. I'm DeAnn Campbell. I am the head of the Children's and Young Adult Library at the Community Library. And our role is sort of supporting literacy from birth up to about the age of 18 through our collections, outreach, educational programming. And I am joined today by Dr. Evelyn Johnson, the CEO of Lee Pesky Learning Center. She's going to introduce herself in just a minute and also give an overview of the first session. Some of you were probably there, some of you may have not been. But in the spirit of the Community Library, we usually start all of our sessions with a book recommendation and a small reading. So I'm going to do that today. And I have chosen a book I read long ago called A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. And I don't remember much about the story of this book, but I definitely remembered the main character, Francie. And a couple of things really stood out to me about Francie. One was that she loved libraries and she tried to read every book in the library. And the second was that she was so excited about learning and she was finding that she was not being properly nurtured, I think, emotionally or educationally at her school. And so one day, walking through a neighborhood, she finds a school that feels like a school she wants to attend. And so her father takes her to the neighborhood where this school is. They live outside the boundaries, and he has her pick a house. And then he writes a letter and has her transferred to that school. And he tells her that she can never get in trouble at school and they can never send a letter home because then they will find out that she does not live in the boundaries. So I'm just going to read from chapter 23. Francie was happy in this school. She was very careful about being a good girl. Every day as she passed the house whose number she claimed, she looked at it with gratitude and affection. Francie loved that school. It meant that she had to walk 48 blocks each day, but she loved the walk. She had to leave earlier in the morning than Neely, that's her brother, and she got home much later. She didn't mind, except that it was a little hard at lunchtime. There were 12 blocks to come home and 12 to go back, all in the hour. It left little time for eating. Mama wouldn't let her carry a lunch. Her reason was, she'll be weaned away from her home and family soon enough, the way she's growing up. But while she's still a child, she has to act like a child and come home and eat the way children should. Is it my fault that she has to go so far to school? Didn't she pick it out herself? But Katie argued, Papa, it's such a good school. Then let her take the bad along with the good. The lunch question was settled. Francie had about 5 minutes for lunch, just time enough to report home for a sandwich, which she ate, walking back to school. She never considered herself put upon. She was so happy in the new school that she was anxious to pay in some way for this joy. It was a good thing that she got herself into this other school. It showed her that there were other worlds beside the world she had been born into, and that these worlds were not unattainable. So that is from A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. So Evelyn, I'm going to have you now just introduce yourself and give us a quick overview of session number 1. Today we're talking about closing the opportunity gap, but can you tell us about what we talked about last time?
Sure. It looks like I'm having a little bit of trouble with my video. If someone could say something in the chat and let me know if you can hear me okay. I moved locations in my home. Great, thanks, Eric. First of all, thanks so much, DeAnn, for reading that selection. Tree Grows in Brooklyn is one of my favorite all-time books. I read it so many years ago. You pulling that out today reminds me that I think it's time to reread it. I'm Evelyn Johnson. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO of Lee Pesky Learning Center and also a professor of special education at Boise State University. I was on this session, our first listening session with Jenny Davidson a few weeks ago, and we really thought about doing this whole series together so that we could discuss the opportunity gap in education. And we set up the series of 3 so that in the first session, we would give some background on what the opportunity gap is. And for those of you who maybe weren't able to join us, really briefly, when we look at performance of students across schools, and in particular, we'll focus on Blaine County for now, what we see over and over again is that students who are Latino, students who are Black, students who are Native American, students of color, students from low socioeconomic status backgrounds, students who are English learners, students who are students with disabilities, the population that we work with, consistently and for a very long time now, perform less well than white, essentially middle-class students do. And it's not unique to Blaine County. We are going to focus on the issue here in the Wood River, but it occurs nationwide. And we really, one goal of this listening session is to bring awareness to this issue and to help change the conversation away from this notion of an achievement gap, which tends to sort of blame the student for, right? It makes it sound like the performance issue is with the student. When we talk about opportunity gap, what that really helps signify is that our schools have been structured in a way that's really set up to benefit those who already come from privilege, and it's set up much less well to support the needs of students from underserved populations. And one of the goals of the sessions was to bring awareness to this issue and to talk about both some short-term solutions and some longer-term solutions. And Jenny and I had a great conversation. That broadcast is archived at the library, and then we also have it available at Lee Pesky. And what we promised everybody at the end of that, because we did spend quite a bit of time talking about the issues and the challenges, and we promised everybody that today we would come back and start talking about solutions. So I'm really happy to be here with you tonight to do that.
Yeah, I know, Jenny. And you talked about maybe it was a little depressing, and that today we wanted to come with some ways that we are addressing them. So let's jump right into that. How can we address the opportunity gap that almost seems to be widening in the current crisis?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I know it's one that's on a lot of people's minds, especially now, like so many things that have happened as a result of COVID and all the closures, and it's really come to light how wide this divide between haves and have-nots across like so many different social sectors is, and the same is true in education. And so, and the problem is pretty big, right? And so it can feel like almost, too much to try and take on. But the way that we have started to think about it in partnership with you and a lot of other great organizations up here in the Wood River Valley is to think about like the short-term needs and then also the longer-term needs. So I'm going to start with the short-term focus. So right away, we know that there are kids, and this is in any case, this is not just because of school closures, although it's certainly been impacted more heavily because of closures. There are a group of kids who need immediate extra help, right? And so we have a lot of add-on programs, and they're great because they serve a need and they're important and they help us reach out to students who need that extra help. So there are a lot of wonderful examples. I saw somebody from the space log on. That organization is doing great work supporting students who need SAT and like college test prep and college application support, trying to do it at no cost. They're a great organization. You have wonderful programs at the library. I Have a Dream Foundation is working really hard to provide support to students. The Wood River Y runs a program called Power Scholars that focuses primarily on like second and third grade students and helps develop not only reading and math skills, but then also engages them in science and STEM and physical activity. We are running this summer a program called Pathways to Literacy, where we wanted to really target students who were entering first grade, who are English learners. And we have spent the last 7 weeks, we're next week is our final week of our summer program, working with 10 families, both at the Haley Community Campus and then up at the Community Ketchum Library, helping them develop the foundational reading skills that are going to help them get off to a good start. We've been able to serve 10 families this way, and lots of the kids have made terrific progress as a result. And so, there are a lot of things happening in the Valley, again, to focus on these short-term solutions. Like I said, they're great and they're important and they're urgent and they're needed, but we also have to start thinking about longer-term solutions as well.
Yeah, I think for, we at the library try to do that as well. And sometimes it's hard to focus both here and also into the future. Every summer we run a summer reading program. And I think one of the challenges we have in the Valley is just the spread. It's a very long, narrow valley, and the county stretches all the way, to Cary. There's students all along there that have needs to be met. And I think the community library is uniquely positioned in that as a nonprofit, we don't have really physical boundaries. You don't have to live in a certain place. You can get a library card and use our library services no matter where you live. But we can be kind of far for some people to travel to physically. And so this year, and I think this was because of COVID, we for the first time moved our summer reading program completely online, where you could register and participate no matter where you lived. And that was, I feel like a goal of ours for the past several years, but the pandemic kind of forced our hand into really getting that technology set up. And I think the most surprising thing is we had a record number of teen participation this year.
Oh, wow.
I think our numbers with children was pretty steady, or maybe even a little down, because we do have a lot of out of town participation, summer visitors that may not be here to participate in that. But we had, the most, the greatest number of teens we've ever had. And I think it's also really important for parents to understand it's not just their own children's reading, but it's also being read to. We allow that in our summer reading program, like read to your kids, let them listen to audiobooks. It really helps them learn the flow of language and the fluency and how it sounds. And then I'm hoping we also run every summer our Bloom truck. And this summer it looked really different. So I'm hoping that this was both a short-term solution and kind of a long-term solution.
Yeah.
In that the Bloom truck is a partnership that the community library has with the Hunger Coalition, and the Bloom truck takes lunches and a mobile library. And then we also partner with other community partners to provide some educational enrichment. And because of some of the requirements for social distancing and things, we did not circulate books this summer. Instead, we one of our librarians called it a summer of giving. And we started a project that we called Seedlings. And seedling books are books that kids get to keep. and use to build their libraries at home.
Oh, cool.
And so every time you came to the Bloom truck, we would have, a selection of books for kids to choose from that are books that they get to take home, they get to keep, they don't need to be returned. I'm hoping they get passed down to younger brothers and sisters or traded in the community, but the kids really have a chance to build a library at home, have books in their home, and I think engage with the joy of reading. I think summer is a really good time to do that. So I think, that was both sort of a short-term solution, but I'm hoping that those books that are out in the community and out in people's homes will have a long-lasting effect as well. So I think those are kind of some, immediate solutions. What about things that are longer term?
Yeah. Um, yeah. Thank you for running all the programs that you are. Getting materials into people's hands and houses is really, really important. And so thank you for doing that. The families that we've worked with and the schools we work with throughout the state of Idaho often talk about the need to get resources to parents, as well as to some classrooms, especially the early childhood programs that may be less well resourced than a school district. And they're trying to build libraries. And so you're giving books. We've had a statewide initiative to give out literacy learning mats that have really fun and engaging activities that parents can do at home. We've also gotten sets to preschools, so that way the teachers have the materials in their classroom. They can engage in the activity in the class, and then the kids get consistency at home. We also have been able to, with generous support from lots of donors, been able to translate all of those materials into Spanish. So for families for important for
I
all the
lost
reasons, for all the reasons you mentioned. So, so yeah, lots of short-term things. So let's talk about the harder stuff, the longer term. So, a big reason why the opportunity gap exists, it relates to socioeconomics, right? It's not, our schools are funded locally, so schools that serve more affluent areas tend to be better funded than those in poorer areas. One thing that has become just so clear to me in the last several years is that we need to really invest in training for teachers in evidence-based reading instruction so that our teachers are empowered to provide the kind of reading instruction in the classroom that benefits all students. One of the things that we do at the center is the Idaho Early Literacy Program that runs, like I said, across the state, and we are training preschool to second grade teachers, trying to create like that really strong system of support in those critical early elementary years so that every student has access to the high quality instruction that they need. As a special ed person, right, someone who has spent most of my career in special education working with kids who struggle with learning and attention challenges, we know that there is just a shortage of really highly qualified teachers to work with that population of students. What we also know is that there is a real shortage of teachers who are trained in bilingual education, and that's, it's so important for students to have teachers who can help scaffold that bridge, right? That between them learning in their native language and making that bridge into English. So one of the things that we've done, just like you explained so well with your book program, how an immediate solution is now growing into a longer term fix because you're addressing the problem of getting resources in the home so that kids and parents can engage more often. One of the things that we're hoping to do or planning to do with our Pathways to Learning program is to then engage students either at the CSI Blaine County Extension. Once schools reopen, I'll approach the Blaine County School District to also reach out to high school students who would be interested in being trained to offer our supplemental reading instruction to first grade students. And in that way, we can recruit more students who are Latino, who are Spanish speaking, help get them some credit and internship opportunities that we'll support paying for, right? So we're facilitating that college process for them, and hopefully they'll fall in love with teaching and reading the way that I know we both have over the years, and become interested in becoming a teacher, because we certainly need a teaching workforce that is much more diverse and, like I said, much more grounded in those evidence-based practices for both for students with learning challenges as well as students who are bilingual.
Yeah, so you're talking, Evelyn, about a program to really support and incentivize even younger students who may be interested in an education field and also be bilingual in order to be role models, not only role models for kids, but also to give them that added support. And that really sounds like a great thing to be working on and investing in. I think we talked about this once, that I kind of stress a lot with parents that especially reading can be just mileage, like putting in the work of reading a lot, but that also can be challenging if students need intervention. Mileage is only good if you already have a pretty solid skill set. And if you need intervention or extra help with those skills, where can students get that, and how do they get that, and from whom, are really good questions that need long-term solutions.
Yeah, and in the field of special ed and also at the Pesky Center, one of our biggest hopes is that we always work ourselves out of a job, right? That's always the dream. And so that's why we focus so much on helping to build both teacher capacity, right? So to really, again, ground teachers in evidence-based practices. So those include things like systematic phonics instruction, making sure that we're exposing kids to really rich vocabulary, supporting their comprehension, engaging them in literacy activities. There's a very strong evidence base in how to teach reading well, particularly for those who struggle. And so if we can do more to support teachers in reaching all students, what that helps do is it helps to prevent some of those students, right? Because the longer you go on and the bigger that gap, the more that students who maybe got off to a slow start to present with issues that are very similar to students who have learning disabilities like dyslexia, and can wind up needing very, very intensive intervention, which of course is expensive. It takes very highly trained teachers to provide. It usually takes additional time. And so if we can work in a more proactive, preventive approach, the idea is that we can reserve the resources for a much smaller percentage of students who really do, no matter what's happening in the classroom, they would need that additional help. So that's certainly one way. It's certainly one way that we're trying to address this issue. I'm seeing some things in the chat about educators rising from Eric and other people talking about internships for underrepresented high school students. And Leona Anthony commenting that children also need role models that look like them. You took the words right out of my mouth. There's um, a saying or a meme or, social media posts going around saying, if you can't see it, you can't dream it. And so, and all that is the idea about this need to really diversify people like teachers, right? So that students have role models who look like them so that they can imagine themselves becoming teachers and serving more students. So it's a great comment. Thanks for making it, Leona.
And Evelyn, I think this all takes such a grand community effort. So if someone's not in, a field like education or maybe working at a library, what kind of support can just the normal community member, parents, grandparents give to help close this opportunity gap and support students?
So many things. I'm looking at the clock. We only have half an hour and I could probably talk the rest of the time just answering that question. So I'll try and be brief so that we leave, we can keep the conversation moving, but so many things. So I'm going to give a specific example from our Pathways to Literacy program because I think it demonstrates exactly what you just talked about, right? So when we were able to raise some funding to get this program off the ground, and then we were able to staff it with a Spanish-speaking tutor. I was like, okay, we have two very essential ingredients of this program down, but there's a lot more that we need. So because we didn't want to jeopardize the health and safety of students, we wanted to work one-on-one and we wanted to try and work outdoors. And we wanted to make sure that we removed transportation as a barrier. So I reached out to Christy Heitzman from the Blaine County Ed Foundation. She connected me with reading specialists who then connected me with families. And the community campus, we have space there, but they were so gracious in letting us be flexible when I wasn't sure if we were going to try and be inside or be outside. So they were super helpful. You guys were incredible in giving us that prime real estate right under the children's library in Ketchum. Then the teachers who reached out to parents for us, one of them is a teacher at Alturas, and she recognized that because we were only working with kids for 30 minutes each time, that transportation might be an issue. And so she volunteered to help get kids to the sessions and back on the days that their parents weren't able to. It ended up working out that she only needed to do that, I think 3 times out of the now 20 some odd days that we've been working with kids. But just making it available was so helpful. I had a retired teacher contact me when she learned about the program and heard that I'm working to keep the support going in fall, and said, I'd be more than happy to work with 1 to 2 students twice a week. And so now I have a very seasoned teacher volunteer. I reached out to Hallie at the Blaine County Extension Center, and she's got wheels in motion so that we can start working with college students. So there are going to be a number of ways, but I think, the larger thing that we can do is just like everybody who signed on last time and who signed on this time, is engage in this conversation and really start to develop that literacy rich environment in the community, and also keep this front and center as an important issue that needs to be addressed, because these one-off, I don't want to say one-off, I'm sorry, these programs that we're all working so hard to run, and they bring so much benefit, but they're not, it's not a systems approach, right? What we need to do is we need to start thinking about what needs to happen in the school, that different, what else needs to happen in the school. There's some opportunity coming up with some leadership change there. should we prioritize trying to recruit someone who either has experience or has an incredible commitment to making sure that all students in the district are going to be served well? I personally would vote for that. But if we have this community conversation around it, we can really make sure that that becomes one of the priorities. All of our programs need funding, so that's another way that people can support. We need resources, so we've had people donate water and snacks and pencils for the kids, and just things that keep it fun and engaging. So we've had lots of people help spread the word about programs to their networks, and that of course helps us raise funds, awareness, and resource. So many ways for people to get involved. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's also really, I think when you talked about seeing their community engage with literacy, I think I just sort of thought, well, what does an engaged community with literacy look like? Is that, kids being able to see their parents, their grandparents, people in the community, reading, engaged in reading. And so I had that thought, just seeing people read. And yeah, what does that look like to have a community that's engaged with literacy? To you, what does that look like, Evelyn? I had one more thought, but it kind of went away, and I'm sure it'll come back. So I'm going to come back to it.
Well, I think you really nailed it earlier, DeAnn, when you talked about all the outreach programs that you're doing at the library. Lots of communities have shared reads. I think that right now it's not safe to do this, but when hopefully we resume to being able to be more in person, there's lots of opportunity to match people who may be retired and are looking for things to do, to either take on mentoring a college student, or sitting and reading with children, or just listening and to a child read to them. There's reading and sharing a joy around books and literacy and stories, I think is one of the simplest ways we can help build that literacy rich environment. The other thing is, again, I can't overemphasize how important it is for people to understand that teaching reading, we know a lot about it. We meaning like there's a lot of research that informs practice. There is for people who are not in the education field, it is very I commonly get questions like, can't kids read if they just really try? And or read to children in English if they're English learners. Shouldn't we only engage in like reading very rich literature? Doesn't phonics take away the joy of reading? Those are probably the three most common myths, I guess. I'll say I hear. And so for each one, so there are students for whom reading is very challenging. If you think about all of the moving parts that need to come together to read accurately and fluently, you have to know the letter sounds, right? And in English, we have a lot of different combinations of letters, right? So the easy example is like there are like the letter F says f, right? But two Fs also say f. PH also says f. GH also says f in some words, but not in others, right? And so there are all these uh, what seem like irregularities, they're actually not, but they sure feel like that. And so you have to know all of those. You have to, as you're sounding out a word, be able to hold all of those sounds in your memory as you're putting them together. Uh, Attach it to some representation that you have in your mind of that word. So if you think about it, and I know I made this point last time that I talked with Jenny, but I'm going to say it again. If you're an English learner, that task is monumentally more difficult, right? Because you don't necessarily have the vocabulary. So as you're sounding out a word, you are really relying on your decoding skills to get it accurate, because you may not, even if you're saying it correctly, you may not have that word in your mental lexicon because you don't know it. And so learning to read in a second language is so much more difficult than it is in your native language. And then you read, you have to string the words together, and you're like constantly updating your understanding of what you're reading based on what's come before and what comes after. One of the things that I've noticed a lot this summer, we have a couple kids who are a little bit older who bring their younger siblings, and I've had the pleasure of sitting and reading. I sit and read with them while our teacher is working with the younger students. And when there is like complex text structure, so these students they are Spanish speaking at home, but they are pretty proficient in English, or at least they present that way, right? So it's easy to think, oh yeah, they're fine. But then once they start reading these more complex structures that maybe contain a lot of metaphors or similes, or structure that you're not used to hearing in conversational English, it can be really difficult for them to keep up, even if they know how to read each individual word. So there's so much that goes into reading, and so it's not just motivation, right? It's a critically hard task. So that's first. The second is, we really need to teach kids how to decode, because if you can't access the print, you can't access the book. I'm sure we have lots of technology supports now, but not for everything yet. And there is something to be said for being able to decode on your own. And now, because I get so excited talking about all of this, now I've forgotten my third point that I was going to answer. But maybe that's a sign for me to stop talking, because it looks like we've got a couple Q&As popping up.
We do have a couple questions, and I don't know how much time that is going to take. I'm going to maybe just end with something. Well, before we get to those, is when you talked about the joy, I think that's just really critical for kids to discover the joy of reading at some point in whatever manner. I will say that one of the first times that I ever went out on the Bloom truck, we encountered a young man who approached, and he was so happy to find a graphic novel on the truck that was based on a popular book that was out. And he said to me, all of my peers are reading this book. It's the movie's out in theaters. They're all reading it. And I am not quite a good enough reader to be able to read the book, but I can read the graphic novel. And that way I can be able to be in with my peers and talk to them about this. And, I think access this thing from popular culture that he felt isolated from because of his reading skills. And I thought that was really great. And the other thing that I just wanted to briefly mention about the Bloom truck is I had a librarian who worked a couple years ago and has since left the Valley. But she said that she felt like the most important thing that the Bloom truck does is not necessarily food and not necessarily books, although those are important. She said it is an opportunity for these kids to be seen. They just want to be seen. And part of that was I realized that that kids at a young age are seen by their parents and they're seen by their teachers, but sometimes they are overlooked by other adults that are just passing them by. And that, it just gives them an opportunity to be seen and to be engaged with. So I think when we talk about what our communities can do, I think, part of the support is just seeing them and seeing those needs and then addressing them. So do you want to move to some questions, Evelyn?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. I may not be in order here, but I see one question from Ellie. What do you see as the most critical learning challenge for teens?
All right. I guess we'll start with the tough ones first. Ellie, that's an awesome question. I'm gonna answer it from a literacy perspective, because since that's the focus of our conversation, and that's my background for sure. I think it is really helping them. It's like you're competing now for time that, there didn't used to be so many demands on kids' attention and time. And yes, I am speaking about technology and all of the other activities. So reading, I should have looked up some data, because I always like to include data anytime I talk. But I know there have been surveys about kids engaging in reading for leisure, or just asking, like, how many books have you read outside of school? And all of those numbers are getting smaller and smaller and smaller over the years. And so for me, it goes back to your comment you just made, DeAnn, about finding that thing that's going to get kids reading more, because they really enjoy it and it becomes relevant for them. So, when you made that comment, it reminded me of the conversation you and I had outside the library last week. About, I think it was your husband, you said, like, he found a book, he's into running, and he's reading all this stuff about running, and that's great. And so, like, same thing for teens. Can we find that thing, whether it's the graphic novel, it's the interest, a sport, a hobby, some story that just really resonates with them, so that we can get them reading widely. It's how we learn, it's how we develop vocabulary, it's how we're exposed to new ideas. Here's a really important thing: it's how we get information, right? And how we start to, when we're well read and we have, like, a wide breadth of knowledge that's developed from all of that reading, it also helps us be better critical consumers of information. So I think really, if I had to vote, Ellie, I would say getting teens to read more widely, independently.
Yeah, and Martha has just made a comment that reading is also coming in different forms. It may not just be traditional books that engage teens or adults. And that was
Yep.
kind of the conversation that Evelyn and I had last week, in that I told her that I've never seen my husband read a book. I don't mean to, like, throw him under the bus, but then I had to really look and see and realize that, I mean, I have seen him read some books about running, but I just said, oh, I thought for a while that I never saw my husband read, but when I took a step back, I realized that reading for him looks very different than it does for me. He does not pick up novels, but he does read a lot of informational text. And, and I think even educating our kids about that, that is still reading. Reading can look different for different people. We also have another question about what systematic changes would you prioritize? And it also asks, are you familiar with Ted Dintersmith's What School Could Be? I'm assuming that's a book. I'm not familiar with
Yeah.
the author.
Yeah. Yeah. More good questions, it looks like, from Ellie. I think in terms of systems changes, I would prioritize focusing schools' attention on early literacy. I don't mean to give numeracy or STEM short shrift, but if, in a world of constrained resources, which every public school operates under constrained resources. If you don't focus on something, then you tend to get this hodgepodge of, of offerings that benefit some kids, but certainly do nothing for a real lasting change. When a focus and dedication is given to improving early reading, then people get results, right? There's lots of case stories about it. There's a wonderful book that's now, I don't even know how old, 25 or 30 years old, called it was originally called the 90% solution, and then they kept increasing, focusing on making sure they were getting all their kids up to high reading levels. And so now I think that it's up to 95% solution, about a small district in Washington, central Washington, that serves a very diverse population of students. And they stopped and they put their entire emphasis on improving early reading outcomes. And so they dedicated the time, the scheduling, they invested in the research-based curricula and the training that their teachers need. They set up systems to look at data so that they could understand which kids were benefiting, which kids needed additional support, and then invested in providing those additional supports. It's, it is a lot of intense work, but there are so many, there are so many cases of districts and schools being successful when they just go all in on early literacy. I know our state's K-12 task force made that as one of their main recommendations to the governor and to the State Board of Education, that schools where there is this long-standing, persistent, low reading achievement really need to rethink what they're doing. So that would be one. The other one I think I already mentioned, we really do need to diversify teaching staff and make sure that we've got teachers who are really highly trained to work with students with disabilities and students with other learning challenges, whether that's being an English learner coming from a low SES background or coming from an underserved population. We really need to do a better job there.
Yeah, I'm going to just mention Eric's comment here that literacy focus is critical, and he would add that math knowledge and skills is also super critical as a driver of opportunities in middle school, high school, and beyond. Lots of marginalized youth get tracked away from rigorous math instruction in K through 5, and it has huge implications for students' futures, which I'm sure is also pretty true. And then Ellie is asking as well about donations for the Bloom truck. So Ellie, I need to email you. I can do that tomorrow. We were looking at being really wrapping up that project in the next 2 weeks with the start of school, and with Blaine County School Districts pushing back the start date for school. We are looking at how we extend Bloom. The goal always has been for Bloom to serve kids from, the Monday after school is out to the Friday before they return back to school. And so now we're looking at extending our sort of Bloom season another 3 weeks, and we are not really sure what that looks like yet, but I'm sure some donations might be welcome. Evelyn, did you want to talk to the math skills or?
Yeah, Eric is so engaged in this space and so knowledgeable. So I appreciate his engagement here. Absolutely. Numeracy is, if you look at the in the early childhood education research, right, the 3 best predictors of later school success are their early literacy skills, early numeracy skills, and their ability to self-regulate or social emotional skills. Like if you can get those 3 pillars down, you can help a lot of kids have a lot more success. So yeah, I in no way want to suggest that we stop focusing on math, but we have so much work to do in in reading. And again, reading, there is literacy that can be developed around math. And so like our professional development team, for example, is working again across the state in early childhood centers where they've helped them put into place not only literacy routines, but numeracy activities that have a very strong language component, right? Because math comes with its own set of vocabulary, right? And the earlier that we can help students develop that and engage in it and become comfortable in it, Eric's absolutely right. We get them off to great success, but math can also be developed within that literacy environment.
And then Evelyn, we have not talked. I feel like we have this really, this COVID-19 cloud hovering over us, and I don't, we I think have talked about so many things. Very difficult to kind of address the barriers that have been presented because of COVID-19 and school closures and virtual learning. But how, do you have ideas about how we can overcome the barriers that have been presented just with the current crisis? I find that, just in my opinion, it has really exposed a lot of weaknesses of our system, and I think once again we see that families and kids with privilege are just better equipped to deal with the challenges.
Yeah. First, I just want to thank like every teacher and principal and everyone working in a school for what they're doing right now to get ready, knowing that they've probably got 100 different contingency plans happening based on how things go here the next couple weeks. I say that with a lot of experience. My husband works in public schools, and I watch him and the team he works with, and they're engaging in all kinds of planning and preparations, trying to make sure that they're keeping their teachers safe, their students safe, their families safe, doing it without having necessarily received any additional resources to do that. And so it's just an incredible amount of work and uncertainty. And there are so many people, just amazing people doing great things to try and figure this out. So I want to start with that. In terms of like the highest priority, some of the best advice that I have read is it relates back to an earlier comment you made, DeAnn. I keep referencing things that you said we should talk more about kids wanting to be seen. One of the things we know is that if schools do have to start remote or at some point in the school year go to a remote environment, there is a pretty significant digital divide. The Blaine County Ed Foundation has done a wonderful job getting devices and Wi-Fi access to kids in the Valley. I know the Idaho Business for Education is I was going to say raising laptops. That doesn't sound right. They are collecting laptop and device donations. They're located in the Treasure Valley, but their goal is to get them out across the state so that every student has devices. Lots of ed foundations across the state have been really responding to that critical need to get access. But the other thing is that connection piece and that needing to be seen, right? Because it's easy enough for kids who are not feeling confident or not feeling supported in school to kind of like disappear in the classroom. Think how much easier that is to do in an online environment. And so, I've been reading a lot about the need for teachers and schools to think through how they can connect every day, even if it's super brief, with all the students they serve one-on-one, whether that's an email, a text, a call, a video. Again, brief, but it's just that way of saying, I'm here, I see you, I'm invested in you and your success. And I think that is going to be one of the single most important things that we do. This is across grade levels.
Right. And I think across our country, I think that's very great. I'm also very appreciative of Leona's comment. She says to further support early reading outcomes, have family reading programs, work to engage families with culture related reading lists at different levels. And this is, I feel like, something we've thought about in our department and have not really implemented. And I think it's a great idea, something that we probably will start working on. And I think, that's just another thing. We are certainly open to what we are trying to do, I think, at the library, especially during this time, is to meet community needs and student needs and family needs. I think it's very challenging, and we really do welcome, input about, what challenges you're facing, at home, educating your kids. If we're at home, if we're in person, what resources do you need from the library? What support do you need? What ideas do you have? We're open to that. So I think my email is on the website, or there are emails there to get in contact with us. So if you have ideas, that's great. Just a couple of minutes left, Evelyn. Do you have any other final thoughts?
Yeah, too many probably. I mostly, because I like ending on a positive note. Look, everyone's dealing with a lot of really tragic, terrible, unfortunate circumstances right now, and so I think one of the most uplifting things that has happened this summer for me, again, has been to see this our program in particular, because it's the one I know the best, come together so quickly with so many people involved, right? So it started with an idea, and then we quickly found some really generous people in the community to help us get it up and running. We had some wonderful help when we reached out. Everybody recognizes that the need is so great, and there are a lot of wonderful people doing their very best to make a difference. And so I really want to end on that happy note, because it has been, it's made me feel grateful and optimistic in a way that not a lot else has this summer. So thank you to everybody.
Yeah, I think that I have been impressed with, just our educators. There are just some really great, I think, creative minds and dedicated to, our youth and ways to help and overcome the challenges. I've been really impressed. So there is the conversation about returning to school in the fall is really just kind of underway, and Evelyn will be joining again with Martha next time for session 3, which is going to be about reaching all learners. And I think probably delving more into the coming school year and deeper into some of those things. But we want to just really extend our appreciation to all of you for being here, for being involved, for continuing this conversation and thoughts, to serve our community and the needs that we have here. And I really want to thank Evelyn for being here and for all your participation and care.
Oh, thanks. And right back at you, DeAnn.
Yeah. So thank you all, and have a good night.